It's really lovely to be with you. Thank you for having me again. It always feels like coming home for me when I come here because this is the church where I grew up, first 31 years of my life here, and where I learned about Jesus in the Sunday school here and in the meetings here. So for me, it's lovely to be back home and really excited to be with you this evening. This morning, when I had COVID this week. I tested clear on Wednesday, so I'm properly safe. It's okay. But this morning when I was preaching, I could feel that I couldn't quite find the words, and my mind was kind of wandering like this as I was preaching. So if you get confused this evening, it's me, not you. I apologize in advance. Please come and ask me questions afterwards. But hopefully, the Lord is strong when we are weak. The Lord is always strong when we are weak. And so we look forward to his blessing this evening. Well, we're in Isaiah chapter 31, and we're going to read Isaiah 31, verse 1 to 32, verse 8. But before we do, I'd just like to set the scene a bit. One of my favorite things in life is a good night's sleep. Anyone else enjoy a good night's sleep? When you wake up in the morning, you think, that was plenty, I'm done, I've had enough, and I'm ready for the day, and I just feel fresh. Anyone love that feeling? It's just the best feeling, isn't it? Not a feeling... You know, I've got 4 small children. I had 4 small children, so for a while that was a rare feeling. But now I no longer have that excuse because my youngest is 4, and so I don't get disturbed at night anymore by my children. But nonetheless, I do find that sometimes now that I'm kind of solidly middle-aged, my brain wakes me up sometimes in the middle of the night. Anyone have that? It's only at 2 o'clock in the morning, bing, your brain goes, wait a minute, what if that happened? What if that happened? I don't know what that is for you. Could be many things. I won't tell you, the variety of things it could be for me. But what if that happened? And your brain flicks on. Now, after that, 2 things can happen. And one of them is great because basically you roll over and you go back to sleep. And that's good because your brain says, well, it won't happen because of this. Or if it does happen, then because of this, it will be okay. And you roll over and you go back to sleep. And that is a good feeling. But the other thing that sometimes happens is that your brain goes, if you had this, then it would be okay. But you don't, do you? So it's not going to be okay. So how are you going to get this? And then, it's a long time until the birds start singing, isn't it? And that basically takes us to the heart of Isaiah. So I guess you've been finding, as you've been making your way through Isaiah 1 to 39, that Isaiah keeps circling back to 2 questions. 2 questions keep on coming up in Isaiah 1 to 39. And they're questions that are forced into the people's minds by the political situation that they find themselves in. And the first question that keeps on coming up is, what do you fear? And the second question is, what do you rely on? And this is stuff that have been forced into the people's heads because of the political situation ever since 735 BC, which is when Isaiah went to confront King Ahaz up at the aqueduct on the road to the washerman's field, up at the upper pool, what later was known as the Pool of Bethesda. And just to explain the political situation, to remind us about it, Isaiah's people, they were living in Jerusalem. So in the area around Jerusalem, the area in blue, just there. That's where they lived, the kingdom of Judah, where the heir of David ruled on the throne of David in Jerusalem, where people would come up to the temple to worship. But just north of them, there was the guys in red. And the guys in red, they were the northern kingdom, and they're broken away from the southern kingdom about 200 years beforehand. King Rehoboam had been on the throne, the kingdom had been shattered, and the guys in red were broken away from the guys in blue, and there was war, and there was trouble between these 2 halves of the country. There had been for 200 years. And that was a problem for the guys in blue, because the guys in red, they look on this picture to have a territory about the same sort of size as the guys in blue. But that area in red is much more fertile and is much more strategic than the area in blue. And so it was much richer, had a much bigger population, about twice the population of the guys down south, and they were always hassling the guys down south. And you can see Jerusalem is right up close to the border, only a day's march from their fortified city of Bethel. And so always the threat was, what if the guys in red invade? But generally things were okay, because there were also the guys in purple. And the guys in purple, that's Aram or Syria in some of our translations, and centered around the city of Damascus. And they were generally fighting the guys in red, keeping them busy, and so the guys in blue got to live in peace. But in Isaiah chapter 7, the people get some catastrophic news. Isaiah chapter 7, verse 2, let me read it to you. Now the house of David, that's the guys in blue, was told, Aram, it's the guys in purple, has allied itself with Ephraim, the guys in red. So the hearts of Ahaz and his people, that's the king in Jerusalem and his people, were shaken as the trees of the forest are shaken by the wind. It's a very vivid picture, isn't it? A heart being shaken like the trees of the forest shaken by the wind. Maybe you know what that feels like, just a deep sense of fear and apprehension. And this is because they knew why the guys in purple and red had joined up. In case they have any doubts, in Isaiah 7 verse 6, Isaiah tells them, this is what they're planning. He says, let us invade Judah, let us tear it apart, divide it among ourselves, and make the son of Tabeel king over it. So the guys in purple and red have formed an alliance to attack the guys in blue. Now we see on our TV screens, don't we, what the horror of war is like. Devastation, ruined cities, orphan children on the run with nothing. And these guys were intimately familiar with the devastation of war. And they knew that is what is coming down the line for us because of the guys in purple and red. And they were afraid. Very, very afraid. What do you fear? Our neighbors up north. Now, that feels pretty different to us. I live in Kent, so we don't spend a lot of time worrying about kind of Surrey and Sussex aligning together and pouring around the M25 past Clackett Lane's services to invade. Maybe we should. Maybe some of you will tell me later that I should spend more time worrying about that. But we don't tend to in Kent. But actually, this is familiar. Because one of the big fears that shapes our lives is the fear of other people. What is it that stops me doing the evangelism I think I should do amongst the other dads at school? What is it that means that, a critical email can really upset me? It's the fear of other people. What is it that when we wake up and think about something in the night that we're thinking about, often it's what someone else could do and the difficulties that would cause us. The fear of people is actually something that really shapes our lives in very unhealthy ways. And so these guys are more familiar, I think, than we might initially imagine. We fit in with them more than we imagine. But God offered them an amazing opportunity. Chapter 7. If you want, God said to Ahaz, you can have any miracle you want in order to strengthen your faith in me. And Ahaz said, yeah, no thank you, I'm fine. And we think, why would you turn down any miracle in the world to strengthen your faith in God? Well, the reason was that Ahaz had already decided that he could solve the problem himself. Ahaz had looked at the map and had said the guys in purple and the guys in red, they're not the biggest nation in the world. Actually, there's the guys in orange too. And the guys in orange, they're the Assyrians. And they're a massive superpower. They've got people who cross rivers on inflatables. They've got these big tank structures that they use for knocking down cities, and no one can stand against the Assyrians. And so Ahaz says, if I can get the Assyrians on my side, then I'll be safe. Then everything will be okay. And so he sends off ambassadors with lots of money. He even takes stuff out of the temple in order to have more money to give to these guys, to bribe them to come and help him. And initially, it seems like an amazing success. The Assyrians capture Hamath, they capture Arpad, they're heading south, they take out the Arameans, they take out the guys in purple and the guys in red, and all of Judah's problems are over, aren't they? Look at the map now, there's nothing at all to worry about, except for the fact that now you've got a superpower right on your doorstep, a superpower that's recently been developing an appetite for swallowing up nice little countries. And so for Ahaz's son Hezekiah, this is a massive problem. And the focus of the early part of Hezekiah's reign is, how are we going to face Assyria? How are we going to face Assyria? He works very hard. He and his team, they dig an amazing tunnel under Jerusalem. I'd love to take you there someday. 1% gradient all the way for 530 meters, bringing water from the Gihon spring into a defendable area inside the city. Hezekiah's tunnel. You can still go through it today. They stockpile weapons. We read about it in Isaiah 22. But then also they look at the map and they say, geography is part of our solution. Look at the map. There's another superpower. They could come and help us. They could come and save us. And Isaiah's saying, you could call out to the Lord. And they're saying, no. We've got a better plan. Egypt. If we can get Egypt on our side, then we'll be safe. Then everything will be okay. And we'll be able to shut our eyes and sleep peacefully at night. Because look at the Egyptians. They've got the greatest wealth of any civilization, the most beautiful treasures. If they're on our side, then we'll be safe. And they've got the most advanced military technology in the world. If we can get them on our side, then we'll be safe. The horizon will go dark with Egyptian chariots as the multitude of their chariots comes flying over the horizon to save us, and everything will be okay. Let's get the Egyptians in. Let's drag the Egyptians in. Hezekiah's advisors sound very much like Winston Churchill in May 1940. Winston Churchill had been prime minister a few days, and his son said to him, how on earth are we going to survive this thing? And Churchill said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to drag the Americans in. If we get the Americans in, then it will be fine. All their massive factories, all their massive technology, all their massive population behind us, and then it will be fine. And that's basically remained the security strategy of the UK ever since. Drag the Americans in, get them involved, and we'll be okay. Because then the horizon will go dark with F-22s and F-35s and B-2 bombers, and we'll be okay as they come over the horizon to save us. So again, this is stuff that we can identify with. And we can recognize the sort of thing these guys are thinking about. If we can get the superpower on our side, we'll be okay. So that's where we are when we get to Isaiah chapter 31. I'm going to read you the passage, and as I do, I'd like you to think, what in this do I find most persuasive as a reason not to depend on the local superpower, to depend on God instead? What image here most strikes you? Or what past most makes you think they should trust God, not the local superpower? Let me read it to you. It'd be great if you've got it open in front of you as well. So grab a Bible if you can find one. There's a few here. I reckon someone might bring you one if you wave a hand. It'd be great to have it open in front of you. Let's read Isaiah 31, verse 1 to 32, verse 8. Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, who rely on horses, who trust in the multitude of their chariots and in the great strength of their horsemen, but do not look to the Holy One of Israel or seek help from the Lord. Yet he too is wise and can bring disaster. He does not take back his words. He will rise up against that wicked nation, against those who help evildoers. But the Egyptians are mere mortals and not God. Their horses are flesh and not spirit. When the Lord stretches out his hand, those who help will stumble, those who are helped will fall, all will perish together. This is what the Lord says to me. As a lion growls, a great lion, over its prey, and though a whole band of shepherds is called together against it, it is not frightened by their shouts or disturbed by their clamor, so the Lord Almighty will come down to do battle on Mount Zion and on its heights. Like birds hovering overhead, the Lord Almighty will shield Jerusalem. He will shield it and deliver it. He will pass over it and will rescue it. Return, you Israelites, to the one you have so greatly revolted against. For in that day, every one of you will reject the idols of silver and gold your sinful hands have made. Assyria will fall by no human sword. A sword not of mortals will devour them. They will flee before the sword, and their young men will be put to forced labor. Their stronghold will fall because of terror. At the sight of the battle standard, their commanders will panic, declares the Lord, whose fire is in Zion, whose furnace is in Jerusalem. See, a king will reign in righteousness, and rulers will rule with justice. Each one will be like a shelter from the wind and a refuge from the storm, like streams of water in the desert and the shadow of a great rock in a thirsty land. Then the eyes of those who see will no longer be closed, and the ears of those who hear will listen. The fearful heart will know and understand, and the stammering tongue will be fluent and clear. No longer will the fool be called noble, nor the scoundrel be highly respected. For fools speak folly, their hearts are bent on evil. They practice ungodliness and spread error concerning the Lord. The hungry they leave empty, and from the thirsty they withhold water. Scoundrels use wicked methods. They make up evil schemes to destroy the poor with lies, even when the plea of the needy is just. But the noble make noble plans, and by noble deeds they stand. Well, turn to your neighbor. What do you find most striking about that chapter? Well, I'd love to hear the things that struck you afterwards. But let me tell you the three things that strike me. And the first thing is the way that Isaiah compares the superpower to God, and how small the superpower seems when compared to God. The way in which Isaiah does it, his tone, I think can only be described as really quite sarcastic. I don't know if you noticed that in the first couple of verses. He too is wise, Isaiah says about God. He too is wise. Yes, some of the Egyptians, they're pretty wise. They've made pyramids, they've set out an amazing irrigation canal, they've developed the most advanced chariots. But God too is wise. He is the one who has hung each star in place. He is the one who has set up the water cycle. He is the one who has engineered the mountains. He too is wise. And again, we might say today, look at the superpowers. They're so wise, so powerful. Can put a man on the moon, can have a base that's 100 kilometers above the Earth. Is that how high the ISS is? Correct me later. But they can control nuclear fission. What amazing wisdom. But next to God, it all looks so pitiful, doesn't it? This is the God who, if you focus a space telescope on a area of sky that's dark, but is the size of a grain of sand held at the end of your arm, and look at it. Look at the picture that something like Hubble Space Telescope will take of that. And you'll see there a near infinity of galaxies containing a near infinity of stars that we can barely see. And yet all of them have such beauty and power that we can barely comprehend it. He too is wise. His wisdom is so much greater than any superpower. But equally so is his power. He can bring disaster, Isaiah says. He too can bring disaster. And this causes a bit of confusion in the commentaries. How is it good news that Isaiah thinks that God can bring disaster? But when your back is to the wall, as Israel was at this stage, then to have an ally, a savior who can bring disaster, that is good news. That is the best news. When you're looking for a rescuer in that situation, you want one who can bring disaster. That was the attraction of the Egyptians. Their chariots thundering over the horizon to bring disaster upon the enemies. That's the attraction of a modern superpower with stealth jets that can cut through air defenses like they aren't there, with nuclear weapons that can cause untold, unimaginable disaster. A hero who can bring disaster is what you need. But when you compare again that to the Lord and his power, any superpower looks so small. If you exploded all of humanity's nuclear weapons in front of the sun, close to the sun, we wouldn't even see it. Because the sun, every second, puts out 70 million times more energy than all of the nuclear weapons in our world combined that have ever been made. The amount of power the sun puts out is just unimaginably vast. This is our God. He too can bring disaster. And then Isaiah says he does not take back his words. Sometimes we worry about whether we can depend upon the words of humans, politicians, superpowers, whether we can trust them. And that would have been very familiar discussions amongst Hezekiah's circle. Will Egypt actually turn up or not? Or not turned out to be the answer we find in chapter 30 initially. But Isaiah says, God, he never takes back his words. His promises are certain. His promises are sure, and he has given them to his people. He has given himself to you in a covenant. He has promised to care for you, and he does not take back his words. He is utterly reliable in a way that no human is. Wise, powerful, reliable. To a different order of any human, even the greatest power. And so what is it like when God shows up? What is it like when God shows up? Have a look at verse 4. This is what it's like. As a lion growls, a great lion, over its prey, and though a whole band of shepherds is called together against it, it is not frightened by their shouts or disturbed by their clamor. So the Lord Almighty will come down to do battle on Mount Zion and on its heights. What's it like when God shows up? Well, picture a bunch of shepherds trying to chase away a lion. They can't threaten it. It's the days before firearms. They can't do anything to it. They're just a bunch of teenage boys trying to look after their sheep, and they're trying to scare off a lion that's standing over its kill. And there's no chance. They can't do anything. They're shouting at it, but but it's just ignoring them. And then what does it do? It growls. And they're the ones who are backing down. They're the ones that are walking away in panic and in fear. And that's what happens. Verse 8, when God shows up, verse 8, Assyria will fall by no human sword. A sword not of mortals will devour them. They will flee before the sword, and their young men will be put to forced labor. Their stronghold will fall because of terror. At the sight of the battle standard, their commanders will panic, declares the Lord, whose fire is in Zion, whose furnace is in Jerusalem. This happened. Assyria showed up, and they turned up with their warriors, their unconquerable, unstoppable warriors, and Egypt failed. Egypt failed to show up. And so Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, he got to work, and he laid waste the land. 38 walled cities he conquered, all the walled cities except Jerusalem. And he wrote in his diary, I have Hezekiah trapped like a bird in a cage. There is no hope left for him. And Hezekiah was left with no option but to cry out to the Lord. And then in one night, 185,000 Assyrian soldiers died, struck down by the angel of the Lord. The mighty Assyrian army had to retreat double quick back home. And this is not mythology. This is straightforward history. We find references to it in Herodotus, the Greek historian, and Berossus, the Babylonian historian. And if you go up to room 10 at the British Museum, it's amazing. Anyone love room 10 at the British Museum? You've got these amazing propaganda pieces that King Sennacherib made. This is part of it, these big wall carvings that he made of his attack on Judah. A whole room in his palace was dedicated to these big pictures of it. But the funny thing is that it's all a picture of him attacking Lachish. Lachish? Have you heard of Lachish? Most people back then hadn't either. It was like, you've invaded Britain and gone home with lots of snaps of yourself conquering Tunbridge Wells. Like, wait a minute, where's your pictures of, yourself next to Big Ben and Buckingham Palace? All these pictures of yourself in the Pantiles in Tunbridge Wells. What is that about? But of course, it's because Sennacherib was defeated. He went back home in disgrace. And actually, the picture that we have of Sennacherib in room 10, you can see there, his face has been chiseled out of it by another soldier because he died in disgrace, murdered by his own sons because he had let the country down, defeated. There's no power that can stand against the Lord. Sennacherib had made the fatal mistake of mocking the Lord before Jerusalem. And he was defeated. Lord Byron wrote a famous poem. The Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold, and his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold. Like the leaves of the forest when summer is green, that host with their banners at sunset was seen. But the angel of death spread his wings on the blast and breathed in the face of the foe as he passed. And the eyes of the sleepers waxed deadly and chill, and their hearts but once heaved and forever grew still. And the tents were all silent, the banners alone, the lances unlifted, the trumpet unblown. And the might of the army, unsmote by the sword, hath melted like snow in the glance of the Lord. The might of the army, not defeated by the sword, but melting away like snow at a glance from the Lord. This is what it's like when God shows up. So much greater than any superpower. And yet, that's not my attitude. If someone said to me, we've got this logistical problem that you need to solve to do with the expeditions, you've got to get these guys out skiing, I could pray for you, or I could call my cousin who runs the US Department of Defense, and he might lend you a bunch of American soldiers or, Marine, like those big Osprey things that kind of vertical landing and take off, and come and just pick them all up and take them. I'd be like, I'll take that one, thank you. I'd love to have the US Army come and sort out a logistical problem that I have. And yet, when I pray, I speak to one who is so much more powerful than the supreme commander of the army of a superpower. I speak to the one who rules heaven and earth, the one whose power is unfathomably great. So what should I say to myself when I wake up in the night? What should I say to myself? This is what I should say. The Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? That's what Psalm 118 says. And it's what the book of Hebrews quotes. And it quotes it in a very interesting context. Hebrews chapter 13 says this: keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. One of the biggest draws of money is that we think that it will give us security. We think that it will give us safety, but of course it's a lie. But knowing that God is with us, that is safety and security. God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? God is with us. He is infinitely more powerful than anything else. We might be tempted to rely on him. Trust in him, roll over, go back to sleep. I'm at point 1 of 3, and I'm out of time. So I'm going to do 2 points very quickly, but 2 very precious points. And the first is that by this point, I think we see how shocking the way that we treat God is. It is outrageous that we ignore him and treat him so lightly. We say, actually, you're not the one that can help me. I need something else. I need someone else. I need that relationship or that investment or that money or that income to be safe. As though God is not enough. As though he is not able or willing or committed enough to look after us. And God is outraged in this chapter by that. He says, woe to you who go down to Egypt. He warns them in verse 3 that those who are looking to the Egyptians for help will stumble, will fall, will perish. Will perish. The way that I treat God grieves him. How then can I live in his world? Well, because we constantly see in this chapter that God interposes himself between us and trouble. He hovers over us. He stands over us. He protects us. And that is a glimpse, isn't it, of the way that God perfectly does that for us at the cross. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. There is no security in this world except at the foot of the cross, where we come to a God who loves us, where we come to a God who interposes himself, puts himself between us and his own judgment, puts himself between us and the trouble we deserve. And it's as we come to him saying, Our Father in heaven, give us today the things we need. That is real security. There is no other security in this world except for coming to him. And it's an ultimate eternal security because of what he has prepared for us. And this is the burden of chapter 32, verses 1 to 8, which I'd love to spend more time exploring with you. Come and talk to me about it afterwards. But there we see Jesus as a shelter for us, one who is a shelter from the wind, a refuge from the storm, streams of water in the desert, the shadow of a great rock in a thirsty land. One who gives us protection, one who gives us satisfaction, one who gives us everything we need. And that is how we will be with him forever. And not only filling our external needs, but our deep need of a changed heart, verses 3 and 4, so that we love what's good and what's right, so that we're no longer blind like Isaiah's people were. And ultimately we will live in a universe that is well run, righteously run, with Jesus on the throne. So these are three themes that we see that I think can help us go back to sleep at 2 o'clock in the morning. First of all, the incomparable power of our God. Put him next to a superpower, and it's like a match next to the sun. Incomparable power and amazing kindness in sheltering us from his wrath, and a glorious future that he has prepared for us as his people. So this is what I'd like us to discuss around our tables. I'm sorry I spent too long on the earliest bits, but which of these themes most helps us with our fears? The incomparable power of God, the kindness of God in sheltering us from his wrath, or the glorious future that God has for us? Let's take a couple of minutes to discuss that around our tables.